Hey, and welcome back. This is the Scaling Secrets podcast where we talk about getting your business to 7 and 8 figures and beyond. And we're here with Mr. Leadership Coach Chris March. And Chris will be talking to us about how to live our best life, bring our A game, and do everything that we need to do in our business. So, Chris, glad to be speaking with you.
Likewise, Robert. Thanks for having me on today.
Glad to have you. And so we gave you like a 3 second introduction to what you're all about. But if someone says, who's this Chris March guy? What makes him tick? How can he help me and my company? What's the answer? What's the elevator pitch?
Yeah, my elevator pitch is that I've worked globally. I've worked in the UK, Australia, and Canada. So I've worked in many different cultures and understand how different cultures operate as well. And I grew up, had big dreams of being a professional basketball player. Didn't quite make it, but that mindset that I had early on has carried over into everything that I've done in my professional career as well. So I bring that mindset into coaching, and I'm all about helping people fulfill their potential, either on an individual perspective or from an organization perspective as well.
Wonderful. And I love that kind of team sports athlete mindset of go where the difficulty is and train and be your best and put in the repetitions, but also don't be a jerk and don't bulldoze over other people and work together, but also be self-sufficient. And so with all those things bouncing around, it just, where's even the starting point? How do we even begin to think about these ideas like leadership and excellence and challenges? What's even the mental starting point?
I think it's just really recognizing your own self-awareness. I think the best leaders are people who recognize that we all have weaknesses, we all have areas we need to improve, and being a leader, it's no longer about growing yourself, it's about growing others. So I think that mindset is something that you really need to instill in yourself as a leader as well. And I hear a lot of toxic leaders or workplaces still to this day, and I think that if you have that, come from that lens of, I'm about helping people to be empowered, I think that will really help you on your leadership journey.
And I love that. And you hear a lot about that, how like hopefully, ideally, the old school leadership style is to just boss people around and tell people what to do. But then now you hear nowadays a lot of it is about being honest and
Yep.
communicating, and also how it applies in your company, but also in your personal life as well, and just like how you are as a person, and that whole outdated idea of you're one person at work and you're one person at home is kind of out the window, and now it's just like it kind of connects to everything else in your life. And so can you kind of like tell us more about this whole idea of like not just helping yourself but helping others?
I think it's the leadership style, which I think has the biggest impact and will be the future leadership style, is a coaching leadership style. I think people, they want to be led to a certain degree and so forth as well, but you want to be empowered. And I think the best leaders empower their people, and they see the potential within someone when they don't see it themselves. And we as individuals have our blind spots and weaknesses. So by taking a coaching-like approach, and I'm not asking everyone to be coach-like in coaching, but be coach-minded in the way that you approach things, be curious, and help people strategically to find the answers that are within them as well.
Wonderful. And that's what we're doing here, right? I'm being
Yeah.
curious about you, and you're being curious about being on a podcast here. And so you've been all around the world, you said, right? You've seen all kinds of cultures or all sorts of countries and personalities and problems. So tell me about some of that. Like, you have a fun story to whip out for us just to experience the magic in action. Like if you came into a situation where they needed help and you gave them some sort of rules and regulations. Tell us about what you do as far as getting this leadership in place where it needs to go.
I've been very fortunate to live and work in many different places. As an Australian growing up, playing basketball was a weird thing back in the 80s, 90s. And then I moved to the UK, spent a couple of years there, which was fantastic, explored through Europe, led a team there, and then came back to Australia and moved to Vancouver, which I lived for a number of years, and then have been in Toronto ever since. And I think the one thing that I've really seen that is important no matter who you're leading is the people need to feel valued. They need to feel that you feel heard, that they feel heard, and they really need to have that connection. If you can really understand the individual for who they are, what motivates them, and have them bought into that overall buy-in of what you're collectively trying to achieve, that will go a long way. And I've seen that across from the UK, here in Canada, and also back in Australia as well. It's just that people still are yearning for that human connection and to be part of something which is going to be successful.
So what's universal is being on a team and being a success with everyone else. And so you're mentioning kind of this idea of, well, figure out what their motivations are. And how is that done? Do you ask them? Do you observe them? And what have you seen usually motivates people? Is there a common thread or like a usual like top set of answers?
Yeah, I think it's just getting, I think the answer is so simplistic. It's that just sitting down and getting to know people. If you show a vested interest in people, they will then care for you and then care for the results that you're looking to attain. So I think it's just about sitting down with every single person. You may have a number of direct reports, let's say 14, 15 people, but then under that you may have an extra 20, 30, 200, depending on the organization. And I think it's vital for you to develop a relationship really from the top down and recognize what that motivation is. For some people, to answer your question, that may be financial, that may be accolades, shout outs and so forth, or a job well done, or different types of accomplishments on a team level or an individual level as well. I think every person is different, and I think that's how you have to have an individual approach when it comes to motivation.
Wonderful. And so it seems like a lot of what you're mentioning here is having a lot of these one-on-one conversations. And so, like, what would hold someone back from doing that? Like, someone said, well, I need to talk to these other people in my organization, but they might say, like, well, I don't have the time, or I don't have the
Yeah.
energy, or I don't know what I'd get from that. Like, what would you say to someone who is just self-defeating in that way?
I think you come from a different way. I think some people say I don't have time or their opinion doesn't matter because there's some people think frontline, if you're so senior up, if you're not in tune with what's happening on the front line as well as the middle and the top end as well, I think that's really important. I think the value that you're going to get in spending that time will pay off tenfold if you just spend a couple of days or a couple of weeks, even if you're starting a new leadership role, just listen. Just be curious, as we're having a conversation right now, Robert, and just say, what's going on in your life right now? How are things with you? Talk about their family. And I think that will really spur conversation. And then from there, align it with work and understand what's working well, what's not. What do you think I should be doing to focus more on my attention for someone moving into a role like this? And then you've built that rapport automatically. And I think that will continue. And then people feel more approachable to you as their leader, because regardless of titles, people feel intimidated. If I'm a CEO of a company, it's intimidating to go to a CEO if you haven't had any type of conversation with them before, regardless of them being a great person or approachable.
Wonderful. And you make it sound so easy, and I guess it can be easy as long as we listen to you to just have these conversations and kind of start it casual. And then this kind of keyword that I keep on just coming across lately these days is active listening. And like you said, that's what I'm doing with you, right? We're just having a conversation and diving into whatever thread needs diving into. And so as far as this, it sounds easy enough, right, to just go in there and have these conversations. But as you all know, real life happens and we come across some sort of struggles. So do you have any sort of just common struggles to share with us? Do sometimes people not listen, or is that the bad apple or the toxic workplace? Like, what kind of problems do you usually see when you jump into a misaligned organization like this?
Active listening is an underrated skill, and it is a skill which takes time to develop. I remember myself as an early leader, and I think I was in the mindset of, as a leader, you have to be the one always giving advice. You're the senior person, so it's important for you to have your say. But I think we've seen that shift now as well, where it's about giving people the time and space to be heard. And I think the great leaders are also great listeners as well. There's a lot that can be learned just by listening to people. And I think the biggest challenge that we have is our phones, emails, the different communication channels as well. If you are having a conversation, it seems so simple, but eliminate distractions as much as possible. Shut everything down and just focus on that person and listen to what they're telling you, and that will guide the conversation.
Shut down those distractions. And Chris, you're making me think that a few years ago, I thought to myself, man, if cell phones were invented a few years before, I would have been completely screwed school-wise. But then after a while, I thought, that's ridiculous. We have these extra distractions now, but that just means that we need to work the muscle even harder and like more deliberately to shut down those distractions and retrain our brain and just focus on what is right there in front of us, the conversation that we're having. And so in some of these conversations, has there been anything that just like blew your mind as far as getting the feedback and you expected to have like one kind of conversation, you got something back that was just like, whoa, that's a really good kind of, information that came back from you. Does anything come to mind as far as surprising results from active listening?
Yeah, I think you have to always be agile in your conversation. You could go into the conversation thinking you have an understanding or impression of how this conversation can go, but then through active inquiry of asking open-ended, thoughtful questions, it may go a completely different direction, and that's where you want to be guided by what you're hearing from the person that you're speaking with through that active listening as well. It reminds me of a really powerful quote, is that be more interested than interesting. And I think a lot of times we tend to lean on the latter, where we want to be the most interesting person in the room. Let the person who is speaking to you feel that instead of yourself.
I think that is huge. And I've heard that quote as well. Don't be interesting, be interested. And when I was a snot-nosed punk, a younger kid, I was so thinking like I have to be witty. If I talk to someone, I have to like one up the conversation and have all this back and forth. But that just sounds exhausting, and that's no way to live in. And then at some point in my maybe like later-ish years, right? We're both still young guys, but you get older and wiser, and you think to yourself, well, not everything has to be the best conversation you've ever had. Sometimes you can just be calm and rational and listen to someone and kind of repeat back and make sure that you understand, and you can be more like slow down and deliberate. And that's just kind of like a personal growth thing on my part. But as far as you, Mr. Chris, since you're the guest of honor, the guest of the hour, do you have anything to share about your own sort of personal growth and transformation? It's easy enough to say, well, here's my like leadership coaching and training, but I'm sure like you've had your own kind of evolution to go through. So is there anything you feel like when you think back to your younger self, you're like, man, I was so deficient in that category and I'm way better now? Does anything come to mind as far as just how you've grown?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift for me was being open to feedback and recognizing feedback is not a personal attack. And I think that is a really big shift. It's hard to get to that place. But if you look at it from the lens of this is going to help me grow personally and professionally, depending on where you're looking for feedback in your life. And if you take that on board, it's going to hurt the first couple of times, most definitely. But if you look from that lens of the growth and developing your own leadership, I think that will really help you. And always be open to feedback and recognize that you're not always going to be the smartest person in the room, and empowering people will help you to get that path. And I think if anyone's looking for a great book to read, it's Mindset by Carol Dweck, which talks about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset as well. If you really tap into that growth mindset, that will help you on your path for leadership.
And I think that's huge, that when someone gives you feedback, you can decouple the information from the pain, right? You can just like, someone can say something and it doesn't have to hurt your feelings, only if you let it. And then maybe even there might be something to, like, there's different degrees of feedback, right? Like maybe someone says something and you're like, I need to take that word for word. But then sometimes someone says something and maybe it comes in at a little angle here and they say all these things and you're like, they give me 5 pieces of information, and maybe like number 3 and 4 were most important. Or even maybe someone says something and it kind of, they say the wrong thing and it hurts our feelings, but we need to think like, well, I'm not going to digest everything that you said, but I get your point, right? You tell me you didn't like this about me or what I did, and like I don't need to just like take it so personally. And I think you're right. It's huge and it might take a while to get to that point, but we need to get there if we want to grow because the alternative is just being stuck and set in our ways. And sometimes you see someone in a position of power, and when they don't have this kind of emotional intelligence, you think, well, they're not a very good leader, right? If they just don't have a handle on their anger and their reactions and things like that. And so, would you say, like this whole leadership thing, right?
Yeah.
We've heard all the cliches and stuff like that, but in your opinion, are there like do's and don'ts of being a leader, or is there like something that like you think separates the good and the bad leaders that maybe isn't talked about very much?
I think that the what we touched on earlier, the active listening is huge. I think having that as a power or as a skill is something that takes development and a lot of practice, like anything you need to get those reps in. You also let in, Robert, with empathy. I think that is a huge, huge skill for leaders, having that empathy and also that emotional intelligence to recognize how you regulate your emotions in certain situations as well. Most of the great leaders have those abilities to, lead with empathy, have the emotional intelligence, and also be great listeners as well, coupled with you need to have strategic insight and also be a great communicator as well. You need to be able to sell a vision that everyone's going to be bought into. So I think those are the main ingredients that create a great leader in today's world.
Wonderful. And so you're mentioning this kind of subtopic of communication and being a great communicator. And there's some interesting things to think about there, right? Like just a few weeks ago, I was doing a podcast like this one, and someone told me that we all talk in stories, and I was like, mind blown. I've lived a whole lifetime and didn't realize like when information really hits home, it's
Yeah.
not when it's a fact or it's a list. It's when you say, I was in this situation, and you can kind of bundle the emotions and the information. And so when you think about what makes a good communicator, when you think about like the empathy you mentioned, and you think about like simplifying things down and storytelling, can you maybe just tell us like if someone feels like they're lacking in communication or they want to be a better communicator, what should they think about and focus on?
I think education is huge and continually being open to feedback. Admittedly, for myself, when I was in high school, I wasn't someone who would be up first and putting my hand for presentations, and now I do speaking engagements, jump on podcasts like this as well. And I think it's something that I've continually learnt and practice. And I think it's important to be open to feedback and ask for feedback. If you're looking for really good feedback for your communication, ask the people around you for what you do well when it comes to communication as well. And if you are looking to present and so forth, ask people what you do well, or take it even further, record yourself. It's gonna feel a little awkward, but if you listen to yourself communicate, look at the way you use body language, look at the way you use words, the spacing when you use words as well. So there's many different ways that you can look at communicating, and I think it's an art that you can not only use in your professional life but also your personal life as well.
Well, I love it. And so you're making, I'm trying to like hang on to all these like little mental notes, right? And so like, you mentioned a few minutes ago of how important it is to get those reps in, right? And to get the reps of getting used to the feedback, to get kind of that slightly tougher skin. And you're mentioning how important it is to record yourself and watch yourself, even though it might be a little painful and awkward at first, but just get over the hump. That way that you can kind of get that feedback, because why wouldn't you want it as long as you can just get over that little embarrassment? You're mentioning to ask the people around us about what they think we're good at as far as our communicating and presenting skills. That way we can strengthen our strengths, right? Because there's some things that we just plain aren't good at, but if someone says, well, you really are skilled at this, if you're really skilled at making a point or telling a story or your humor, then it would be great to amplify that in some ways, cancel out a little bit of the bad stuff. And then I think out of everything you just said there, what really hit home for me the best was to sort of get out of the high schooler mindset, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if they call it high school in Canada, but when you're in those teenage years, right? Like 14 to 17 is when you're just putting in the bare minimum And we've all been in those situations, and even maybe in the present day in the workplace, right? You come in and everyone's like shy and everyone's afraid to go first, but it's like,
Yep.
what if you were the person that was just the excited, enthusiastic, bold person that was the first to put their hand up, was just completely active and 100% there? Because like when you think about it, why wouldn't you do that, right? Why would you sleepwalk through life? Why would you put in the bare minimum? And even though it's weird and awkward, why not just apply the energy? So if someone says, well, I have a hard time unlearning those old habits, right? It's really easy to be passive and to be mediocre. And if someone says, I'd love to be like a energetic, enthusiastic, go-getter type, what would you say to someone to kind of get them on this new track, this new way of thinking?
I think it's important to recognize everyone has their own unique strengths as well. There's certain things that I don't do well. There's certain things that I do well as well. I think it's about putting in the practice. Is if you identify there's a certain skill that you want to become good at. Let's use guitar. You want to learn how to play the guitar. Start with a simple step. And I think if you just, instead of breaking it down over a year, you want to be like Slash from Guns N' Roses, just start by saying each day, I'm going to commit to doing X amount of practice, and simple things compound over day, over day, over day, and over day. And if you just focus on 1 day, 2 day, and so forth, instead of the end goal, you'll already be making progress before you know it. So just focus on doing
One thing at a time, one day at a time, as they say, right? Because
exactly.
if you looked at like how much I don't know how much food you ate, how much water you drank. If you pile it all up in a huge room, it would just be a tidal wave. But you say, I drink these 5 glasses of water per day, or I eat this, one bowl of cereal per day in little bite-sized pieces. That's doable. And then they say to develop these good habits, right? Instead of trying to rush or be overwhelmed with what's in front of you, just do a little bit of good habit in the same way that you just do a little walking or running or weightlifting. Just make it part of your day, and then before you know it, it will all compound and add up. And I love that. And so as far as Mr. Chris and Mr. Chris's future, what are you currently working on, and what do you have to look forward to?
For me, it's just continually growing as a thought leader in the leadership coaching space. I have a few speaking gigs coming up over the next couple of months, continually serving people with my coaching business as well, looking at doing a few workshops in the new year as well, and just growing as a coach myself is the big thing. And I'm really excited for what's ahead over the next couple of years as well. When I look back, a year ago, and I look back at the content and the certain things that I did, if you're not embarrassed, it means that you're not making growth. So I look forward to a year from now, looking back and going, that's not where I'm at now. And I think that's really exciting for everyone. If you put those goals in mind and continually work for it, you'll be so impressed by yourself of what you've been able to achieve in a small amount of time.
Wonderful. And I definitely feel you there as well. Looking back even 6 months ago, a year ago, those old videos, and I used to have the opposite reaction that I should. I used
Yeah.
to look at those older videos and say, oh, what I have put out there, I should just give up. But you're saying instead of that, you look at how far you've come and say, in a year from now, I'll cringe at that too. And that's just part of the ongoing journey. And so those, leaders, aspiring leaders, future leaders out there, do you think there is like a number one skill or problem for them to focus on? Like we've talked about some of these things
Yeah.
like active listening and communicating, but what should people really just be in this day and age looking to increase or enhance as far as their skill set?
Communication is a number one skill, and it's something that I continually look to improve and will improve until till the
Till the
end.
day you die.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's something that you can always focus on, and to really focus on the listening side of things as well. I think in your personal and professional life, that will serve you well. So if you focus on those two things when it comes to leadership and connecting with people, those three things will help you go a long way.
Wonderful. And I mean, it makes perfect sense. And as I've said a few times, you make it seem so simple, but it can be as long as we let it. And you think about like,
Yeah.
if you were on a hot date, if you were just talking about yourself, rattling all this stuff, that's not very interesting. But if you ask the person about their own life, and it's a give and take. That's more fun. And in this workplace environment, same idea. If you're leading someone, and even if you're a few levels up, then it helps just to know just what everyone's problems are, especially those people who maybe feel ignored, who feel like it's not a good fit, and you can say, hey, well, just tell me, like, just give me the answer, and here I am, I'm listening. And it just seems like listening is just so rare, and so few people do it. And so if we can just deliberately say, well, this is my strategy, and here's my goal, and I aspire to become this good leader, this good listener, then we can just eventually get there, or at least just be on that ever-ending quest to do better. And so you've been blowing our minds today, Chris, with some of this really good information. And if someone says, I want to reach out to Chris, or these speaking appearances of his sound amazing. If someone says, I just want to know more about Chris and his business, where can they go?
Check me out on LinkedIn or on Instagram is where I share most of my content. So on Instagram, I'm Chris March Coaching, and on LinkedIn, I'm Christopher March. You can search for me there.
Wonderful. LinkedIn, Christopher March. Instagram, Chris March Coaching. And then how does someone know if they are a good fit for you? What are sort of the prerequisites?
I offer a free coaching session. So that's an introductory coaching session. So that's an opportunity for people to see if coaching is a good fit for them. I think there's still a misconception, or people aren't fully aware of what coaching is and what the benefits are. So I offer that free coaching session. And from there, I leave it up to people to decide if coaching is the right fit for them. We can move forward and we start the coaching transformation together. If not, we'll leave it there. And you've had a session, and hopefully you've got something out of it as well.
Wonderful. Well, you practice what you preach, right, Chris? Because if you were someone that said, well, to be a leader, have these conversations, but if you want to talk to me, good luck. Instead, you're saying, let's have this conversation, so that way someone can just experience firsthand what it's like for them to come to you with their problems and have this conversation and just see what it's all about. So you find Chris March on Instagram and on LinkedIn, send that message, have that conversation, and then see where it goes. And Chris, to make sure that you are extra memorable for our guests, do you have a favorite quote, moral, or lesson that you feel you could share with us today, just to make sure that we remember you very well? What comes to mind as far as a quote, moral, or lesson?
My quote, one of my favorite quotes of all time, is by the great Michael Jordan at his Hall of Fame speech. Never say never, because limits, like fears, are often just an illusion.
Limits like fear are often just an illusion. Well, I
Yes.
love it, friend. And so if this resonates with you, then go and find Chris March on LinkedIn, send the message, have the conversation. And thank you very much, Chris, for helping us out and giving us so many just interesting things to think about as far as our own personal development and our business success. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you too.
Thanks, Robert. It's been a blast. Thanks for having me on.
All right.